Welcome back. This is the second video in the series where we're creating a checkers game in a self-contained SVG. We're picking up where we left off last time with the code on the right and the visual rendering on the left. So in the last video, we wrote the code to generate the board, which we can see here. And so now we're going to continue, and we're going to start by creating a container for the pieces. And we're going to create a defs tag to hold reusable definitions for things like radial gradients and probably circles. I think that if we're going to be creating round pieces for checkers, the most obvious solution is to use a circle that is filled with a radial gradient, and probably to use not only a stroke on the outside, but a stroke dash array style on that. Towards the later part of this video, we're going to generate the pieces in JavaScript, but for now, for the sake of demo, we're going to manually place the pieces ourselves. So we're going to do that with a use element, and we're going to give it an href where it can reference a thing that we're going to create later. And then we're going to give it a translation, which is going to place the piece at a certain XY coordinate. So if you remember, each of the squares on the board is 100 by 100. So if we're looking at the board from the top right, if we're thinking of the light square at position 1, 1, the center of that square is 150 from the top left corner. It's 150, 150. So if we translate this use element to 150, 150, that means that the center point of whatever piece it references will be rendered at the center point of that light square at position 1, 1. So now we need to say what it is we're actually going to be doing. So we're going to start with a red piece. So I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to give it that same ID of red piece. And then in this, we're going to create a circle. The circle is going to contain a radius value. So if we recall that the squares are 100 by 100, and we say that we want the piece to take up maybe 3/4 of that space, so a diameter of about 75, then a radius would be about half of that. So let's say 36 for the radius. And then we're going to give it a fill value. And for the purpose of demonstration, we're going to give it just a flat color. In the future, we're going to be creating a radial gradient. So I chose 770000 because we're creating a red piece, so we don't need any green or blue components. That's why those are 0. I chose 7 because that 7 or 8 is about halfway in the hexadecimal range. And then we're going to give it a stroke. For now, we'll keep it the same. We're going to give the stroke a width. We'll keep it pretty thin for now. And then we're going to set the stroke dash array property. Okay, so we've defined our circle in this red piece group that is reusable, and we've referenced red piece in our use element. And I just need to close off that use element, so I'm going to save that. We're going to refresh over here in the browser, and we see our piece. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to define a radial gradient. And we're going to use this radial gradient instead of the flat color inside the middle of the circle. So let's give this an ID. And we will call this the red gradient. And then we will reference this here. Okay, now inside of this radial gradient, we're going to have a stop element with some offset percentage. And then we're going to have a stop color. So from 0 to the majority of the piece, from the center to almost all the way out of the edge, we're probably going to have that be a solid color. So I'm thinking it should be lighter than the outside. So it should be lighter than the 770000. So we're going to give it that color. And we're going to say that from 0 to 86% is that color. And then from 86 to 92, we're going to transition to the stroke color. And then from 92 to 100 will be a solid block of the stroke color, and that will allow some solidarity just before you get to the dented edge, which is created by the stroke dash array property. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and we'll refresh again, and we see those changes take place in the browser. So now let's continue. Let's make a black piece. So I'll just duplicate some things, and we'll change that to be in a different square. Okay, black gradient. For the stroke of the black piece, I'm going to choose a very dark gray. For the structure of the black gradient, I'm going to keep it the same as the red gradient. So we're going to keep the same offsets. We're just going to change the colors around. So we're going to keep the setup of matching our stroke color to the very outer edge, but we're going to maybe give it something lighter in the center. So let's go ahead and save that, and we'll refresh over here. Okay, now we see both the black and the red piece have a lighter color in the center and a darker color on the outside. So now let's think about kinged pieces. So let's do a kinged black piece and a kinged red piece. And we'll just make sure those show up in different light squares in the browser. And then I'm going to copy and modify some of these things. Black king gradient. Okay, now let's make sure we get the right stroke on the red king. Okay, so I think that's a good starting point for defining the kinged black and red pieces. So now what we need to do is we need to copy these radial gradients and make a red king and a black king version. And I think in general, we're going to keep them the same on the outside, and all we're going to do is we're going to add a band of gold just inside of the outside edge. And so I think the way we're going to do that is from 0 to some value, let's say 64%, we're going to keep this color the same. And then from 92 to 100%, we're going to keep the stroke the same. But then we want the colors on these middle lines to be the gold color. And then we'll transition to and from the gold color at, some interval, let's say 64, 77. So let's think of a gold color. I think gold is mostly red and a little bit green, but no blue. And then for the red king gradient, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to keep our 77 and 64. We're going to make sure that that the last stop matches the stroke, and the first stop matches the non-kinged version. So now we just need to modify the two center values to be gold. So we'll place gold there. Now let's save this and refresh. Okay, and now we see the black and gold. I think I might increase the intensity of the gold on the red. No, maybe I'll decrease the intensity of the gold on the black. So I'm going to lower each of those by 2. And then we'll refresh. Okay, so now the black is a little less intense. So now we see each of our 4 stylized versions of our pieces: red, black, red kinged, and black kinged. So this would be a good point to pause if you need to take a break. But we're going to continue on with, we're going to get rid of these 4 manually entered pieces, and we're going to generate these in JavaScript. Okay, so we'll keep our pieces container there. One thing we're going to do is we're going to just define the pieces container as a constant that we can access. And this will just keep our future code a little bit more readable, so we can say pieces container instead of having to actually do this query every time. Here where we're generating the board, we're going to continue to do that, but then after that, we're going to generate some pieces. Let's copy this function now. And we're going to copy this function name, generate pieces. We're going to keep these loops because they were useful before, and they're going to be useful here too. When you place pieces in checkers, they're placed on the first 3 and the last 3 rows. And in our case, the row is corresponding to the y variable. So if y is 0, or y is 1, or 2, or 5, 6, or 7, then these are the 6 rows in which we might place a piece. So now we're going to define a piece. So we're going to create an element, give it the SVG namespace. We're going to be creating a use element, which is the same as the piece that we manually placed. And then we're going to say if it's 0, 1, or 2, then we're going to place one type of piece, either black or red. Else if y is 5, 6, or 7, then we're going to place the other type of piece. So which attributes are specific to red versus black? Well, probably the class name, and of course the href, the link, the reference, and maybe also the ID. Because similar to how we set the ID here, and we stuffed in the x and y coordinates, we'll probably go ahead and do that here just in case we need to. But instead of b as a prefix, we'll use p for piece. And then we will also say whether it's red or black in the ID. So we'll say that the top one is black, we'll say that's red. And then we will set a class attribute. So the top one here would be both a piece and a black piece. Bottom one would have classes of piece and red. And then finally, we're going to have an href, which will be red piece, and we will copy that back up here for the black version. Okay, so we're setting these attributes based on whether or not it's in a row that should get a black piece or a red piece initially. We're defining piece as our use element that we're creating. So there's just a couple more things we need to do. So we need to translate it, and then we need to append it to the pieces container. And that should do it. So I realize I copied and pasted here and forgot to update square to piece. Okay, so we're going to set an attribute. We're going to set the transform attribute to translate, and it's going to be some x, y value, and x will be, suppose it doesn't have to be an integer, but we'll just say that it's an integer. And then same with the y component will be some integer. So what will the integer for the x component be? Well, it'll be the variable x times the 100 width of each square. And then we're going to add 50 to get it centered into the square. And then similarly here, we will have y times 100 plus 50. So let's go ahead and save on the right, refresh on the left. Okay, so we have one issue, two issues. One is that the black piece is somehow using the kinged version. Oh, because I edited the wrong radial gradient. So let's get that fixed first, okay. Now we need to enforce that the pieces only appear on dark squares, so this if statement is for lights, so we'll invert it in a moment. I suppose this could be before or after the other if statement, or it could also be compounded with it, but I'm just going to put it. I'm going to put it, yeah, I'll put it before. I don't think it matters. And then again, we're going to invert that because we copied the if statement for a light piece, but we only want pieces to be placed on a dark square. So we'll go ahead and refresh, and there we see proper placement of the proper colored pieces that are not kinged initially. So yeah, just to summarize what we've done in this video, we defined the pieces. So we defined a few reusable elements, including a circle that then refers to a radial gradient, and then we have our various radial gradients defined. And then in JavaScript, we iterated on each of the board pieces. We ensured that the board piece was a dark square, which makes it eligible to have a piece placed on it. And then we enforced that the initial rows that get pieces placed on them are these 6 rows. And then we generate a piece, and then based on whether it's the top 3 rows or the bottom 3 rows, we assign it red attributes or black attributes. We do a transformation to place the piece on the board, and then we actually append the piece to the board. So that will do it for this video. Thank you for watching.